Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Our host, Aaron Mayer, our engineer, Mike Ryan, and today's wonderful guest that we have for our listeners this morning is Bob Blackmon. And Bob Blackmon is president of the Justice Center of Rensselaer County, but he also happens to be the father of a pretty famous author who wrote Slavery by Another Name. Again, this is his son, Douglas Blackmon, who again, great collaboration, great family, intergenerational leadership on equity, justice, and just bringing all levels of information from journalism into direct line activism. So today we have, again, Douglas's wonderful and famous dad, Bob Blackmon, tonight. And as I would say, he's still staying in good trouble. Bob, welcome this morning.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you.
Indeed, again, it's an honor. And it's been a few years because the last time I think we were together, Douglas had just launched his book and had begun his book tour. I believe we went to the Independent Media Center down there in Troy, as well as had a very wonderful dinner. But again, that contribution of the prison industrial complex and its impact upon the freedom and as they say, the treatment of African Americans in this country. And that whole cycle, it's led to great conversation on the prison industrial complex. And I know that he's been still blazing that trail of righteousness and justice. But today we're here to talk a little bit about the work that you guys are doing at the Justice Center of Rensselaer County. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Justice Center, but beginning with its genesis, because you're one of the founders of the Justice Center.
Yes, that's right. Well, the Justice Center is basically an activist advocacy organization. We formed ourselves, I guess, about 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Although Bob Doherty, former city councilman here, Bob Doherty and I, probably 4 or 5 years ago, began meeting for breakfast every Friday morning and talking about issues in Troy and so forth. And those discussions actually led to the formation of the Justice Center, and we were incorporated in 2000, I believe, and we're now a 501(c) organization. So that's sort of a brief history of how we got started.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about your justice journey. Why are you centering on this issue, this topic? Why is it important in your life, and why is it important, as a point to even lift up more so now?
Well, we just felt like that there was a need for a group in Troy to be bold and to speak out about social justice issues. And I have sort of a background in that sort of thing. I worked in Mississippi a long time ago. I was there for 12 years and was involved in the civil rights movement in the late 60s and 70s, particularly with school desegregation there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sort of I'm getting old now, but I've been in and out of the justice issues for quite a long time.
Understood. So you were in Mississippi at the height of the issue, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. Were you at that time, after that fact? Because that was a huge effort with regards to voting rights and registering free people of color the right to vote. I mean, they've been, the active segregation, active intimidation was a huge issue, and college students from from the Northeast would go down there to organize and help the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee to get people the right to vote. So were you part of that effort, or in addition to that effort? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I was there from 1967 to 79.
Wow.
And there, I was not directly involved in the voting issues, but I was aware of those, of course. My work was primarily desegregation of the schools.
Okay.
Son Doug, whom you mentioned, actually entered the first grade in the school year 1970-71. That was when the schools were eventually desegregated by an order from the courts.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the first grade, and the actual changeover took place during the Christmas holidays of his first year in school.
a lot of people don't realize, because everybody tends to think or disassociate, and now there's the movement by a lot of Republicans and conservatives as saying, teaching about this history is harmful and oppressive to whites. And they try to make it sound that it was something that occurred in 1867 rather than 1967.
Yeah, right.
And they try to make it sound that it was a long time ago. Folks don't realize that a number of people, it's their mom and dads or their grandmoms and granddads. And this is recent, late 20th century, but very much a part of our lives, but also the ideological life experience of today's political leadership in Washington, D.C. and governing states around the country to this day. So it's not distant, and as they say, it never slept. And we really, as a nation, haven't grappled with these issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, it's amazing to me that we're actually still dealing with some of the same issues that we were dealing with in Mississippi in 1965 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing. If someone had asked me in 1965, are these issues going to be still happening 50 years from now? I would have said no, of course not. This is all going to be solved, and how wrong I would have been.
We see the governor, of Florida, leading the charge, which is really kind of sad, in that, he is actually doing more or less, banning books, so to say. And
Yeah,
this is Governor Ron DeSantis. He's leading a national effort
yeah,
where it's even going to be a felony to talk about racism in America, specifically talking about the civil rights, slavery, uh, outside of a tone, as he says, we don't want to make whites feel bad about their history, but they're not centering on the fact that they're not even talking about how African Americans feel, that this is the life experience still being lived by African Americans. Your thoughts and your feelings on that? We are now have just within still people of that generation or the youth of that generation, because Ron DeSantis would have been a kid or teenager during this period,
right.
now trying to preach that talking about racism and our ugly past and legacy and the need for our country to treat everybody equal under the law, and that he's now, as governor, leveraging the power of the state of Florida to act like George Wallace, of 65.
Exactly. That's
Your thoughts on that?
well, it's just amazing to me that we've come a long way, for sure, on some of these issues, but we have such a long way to go. I sometimes say that the legal obstacles to equality, for example, when I was growing up, black people had to enter restaurants from a back door, go down an alley, and go to the back door of the restaurant. That's no longer the case because it's illegal for those kind of things to exist today. So many of the legal obstacles have been removed, but I frequently think that hearts and minds perhaps have not changed that much.
Mm-hmm.
We're still dealing with some of the same issues, whether it's, and many of the schools in the South have now resegregated themselves.
Well,
And
that's a good point. A lot, there's what they call the libertarian movement. In fact, a lot of Supreme Court cases, whether or not a baker can discriminate against somebody from baking a cake or supplying service based upon religious objection. And we're seeing resegregation and resegregation efforts being even championed and supported by our U.S. Supreme Court, our conservative Supreme Court, under the guise of freedom of choice and but more importantly, personal freedoms and personal liberty. So they're saying, a person has a right, of their choice not to, as they say, engage with blacks or provide services to gays. Uh, you know, uh, uh, that seems to be a big thinking that's been advancing and being the bulwark by which they're trying to tear asunder gains under the civil rights and voting rights movements.
Yeah, that sounds like the same thing that white people were saying in 1960.
Yeah, to me it's strange, and I not strange, and I say strange in the sense that one would think that people would center on the obvious, and one would think that people would center on justice and saying, listen, we're a better society, we're a greater society, pulling together the standards of laws and protection that civil rights activists. It's not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue, but it's basically an American issue. It's an American human rights issue, in that we care about equally protecting people under the law in such a way that their concerns and issues, their race, gender, creed, or orientation shouldn't matter. But right now, it seems that we have that very strong and vocal 35% of America, that part of it led that revolt or supported that revolt on January 6th of last year. And now, they're taking state houses, and they're now using state houses to either pass laws or impose new laws that will be tested in the Supreme Court. That may set us back, 60, 70, 80 years.
I'm afraid it might. Yeah. If you think about what is it, 40 plus state legislatures around the country have laws either pending or have passed that would restrict voting.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing to me that that's happening now in the first quarter of the new century.
Wow. Well, this is one of the big issues. And like I said, it's really an honor to have you here talking about your organization and some of the upcoming events that you folks will have going on. We're getting ready to go to a commercial break, but I want to thank you. Today, our guest is me, but our guest is Bob Blackmon. And he right now here is representing the Justice Center of Rensselaer County. And we will be right back right after this commercial. Sunday morning news, views, and interviews. Your host, Aaron Mayer, and our honored guest today that we have with us is Bob Blackmon of the Rensselaer County Justice Center. And they are a rights organization trying to heal the wounds within this nation, standing for justice, standing for criminal justice reform, economic empowerment, educational system reform, equity and access to all publicly funded resources, but for all resources, equal employment opportunities. They're doing a great deal, again, making our society, our civil society, truly civil, truly just, truly equitable. Bob, welcome back again. We have a lot to cover.
Thank you. Thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the events and programs that you have going on and your upcoming events?
Well, we're still a pretty new organization, and you've enumerated some of our goals essentially, but we haven't done all of those things yet. But we've been involved in policing and police reform. We're very involved in the police reform process here in Troy. We've cooperated with the League of Women Voters in the area of voting rights, and that's primarily been the location of early voting sites. You probably have heard about the controversy with the Board of Elections here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we were advocating for voting sites that are convenient to people who live in poorer neighborhoods, convenient to people of color. Many of those people live near downtown, and we felt like that they didn't have adequate access to voting sites. So with the League of Women Voters, we advocated for locating some of those sites more conveniently. And the first move on the part of the Board of Elections was to locate an early voting site in Brunswick, and another one, I've forgotten where, but it was out actually on the outskirts of Troy. And one of those would require an hour bus ride followed by a 30-minute walk to the voting site. So we felt like that they hadn't done very much. So we kept working on that project and got the courts involved. And anyway, we got a voting site at the atrium in downtown Troy, which is much more convenient for those folks. So we felt like we, succeeded at least to some extent in that.
Mm-hmm.
We've also been involved in environmental justice issues. We've cooperated with the Rensselaer Environmental Coalition to advocate for the closure of the Dunn landfill,
Mm-hmm.
which is a major landfill in the city of Rensselaer, adjacent to the school there. And the school has suffered, the students and the faculty have suffered from dust and foul odors and all sorts of bad things there. And we're hoping to convince the DEC not to renew the permit for that.
Mm-hmm.
Time will tell, of course. Um, those are the areas that we've recently, been quite active in. Um, you mentioned some events coming up. We have a major event coming up April 19th.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned earlier, Bob Doherty was a co-founder of the Justice Center, and unfortunately, Bob died about a year and a half ago.
Oh, goodness.
And I was one of the vice presidents, so that's how I became president of the group. But we have created something called the Robert J. Doherty Memorial Lecture Series, and we're having the first of those, the inaugural event, on April 19th at the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. And we have a speaker who is Dr. Peniel Joseph, who is an associate dean at the University of Texas. He's a historian. He's the author of 7 books so far on race and the history of race issues and that sort of thing. So that event is coming up rather quickly.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Fernil and how you selected him, Dr. Joseph.
Dr. Joseph, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we didn't know him personally, although some of us had heard him on national public radio programs and that sort of thing, and we were really impressed with him. And we got in touch with him, and he agreed to come and be our speaker. He is the title of his speech is America's Third Reconstruction: Building the 21st Century Beloved Community. His book title, and I have it over here, is sorry about that.
It'll make for interesting when folks are watching it on YouTube. Will watch you walk off and walk.
Yeah, right. You can cut that part out.
There you go.
The book is The Third Reconstruction: America's Struggle for Racial Justice in the 21st Century. And he's going to talk a bit about the book and talk about achieving the beloved community. Martin Luther King spoke and wrote about achieving the beloved community. And Dr. Joseph is going to hopefully tell us how and when we might expect to achieve that.
Well, Dr. Peniel is, and for folks who are trying to look at how to spell it, is Dr. Peniel Joseph, and he's an American scholar.
Yep.
And again, he's one of the folks. He's the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and he's at the University of Texas at Austin. What I call that beautiful blue dot in that state, which is a sea of red.
Yes, that's right.
And he's been one of those leaders and forces, pushing and talking about and lifting up the scholarship on equity, inclusion, and power and the civil rights. And he's a very profound. So folks can never look at. There's an HBO series on him, and absolutely there's PBS lectures, and he's, clearly a wonderful choice. And in Dr. King's notion, of a beloved community, Dr. King was basically not talking just about the African American experience, and I think that, a lot of folks tend to, King speaks to one segment of America, and and we can speak with conservatives that, but actually King was speaking for all America, and whether it's the beloved community or the poor people's movement, his life and sacrifice was basically for justice, equity, inclusion, but power together.
Yes, very much so.
And if I say beloved community, what does that mean to you when we talk about beloved community?
What does it mean to me?
Yes.
Well, I think it means, as you pointed out, all of us, regardless of race, coming together in a rather idealistic community, a beloved community, where we all get along, and we don't have people like the governor of Florida doing what he's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's, a lot of people don't realize that when Dr. King gave the speech in 1957, it was his Birth of a New Nation, which was a pivot on that movie in the early part of the 20th century, Birth of a Nation, which was what gave rise, the second rise to the Ku Klux Klan. His Birth of a New Nation servant was basically where he introduced that notion of the beloved community. And it was global in his speech, and he was, celebrating, at that key point, the notion of Ghana, the nation of Ghana's independence from British colonialism, and India's independence, from the UK. And also highlighting the struggle at that point in time in 1957 for struggle and equal rights, and how movements and people coming together, interracial movements coming together and collaborating for justice. This was that plane of elevation and movement of a collective society toward equity, inclusion, and justice, and equal treatment under the law, respect under the law. But people putting that into their fiber and soul. The thing is that the law and passing law is not going to change. You can't legislate what's in somebody's heart.
Yes.
You have to build the institutions that create the conditions by which we have the nation that we aspire to. And that's what the real big threat is. And we're seeing entities on the conservative and on the right trying to tear that down. And right now we have an opportunity, to actually start to build that. And then we just put your URL up, so that people who are looking to do that in the capital region of upstate New York, or even from around the country, wanting to know a little bit more about, again, the Justice Center, Rensselaer County, that they can do so. And, you guys are, again, having Dr. Pernille Joseph there is a very powerful kickoff. So you're sending a strong message. Hopefully your son will be there in person, or if not, virtually, because Doug, he's definitely fathering in your footsteps. And I want to give thanks to you, Dr. Blackmon, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And again, Dr. Bob Blackmon is here from the Justice Center of Rensselaer County, and he will be having on April 19th, Dr. Pernille E. Joseph. Please join him and join the community in building that beloved community. Bob, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule this morning and joining us on News, Views, and Interviews.
Well, thank you for having me.
To the Grand Dam of Rotterdam, we're coming over for a wonderful cup of coffee.